Greetings, I'm Hurt Castro, coming to you from our state-of-the-art Suspension Development Center in Colorado Springs. Now that you've completed the service that required removal of the fork legs, it's time to get the legs back on. Here are the 4 steps. First, we're going to check the lower legs to make sure the seals are lubricated and that the bottom-out bumpers are resting securely in the legs. Second, we'll install the lower legs onto the upper tubes. Third, we'll install the lower leg lubricating fluid. Fourth, we'll reattach the bottom bolts, air shaft nut if it's a dual air fork, crush washer retainer, and crush washers. We'll also torque these fittings to the recommended torque values. Unless you've done this many times before, we sure do recommend that you check out this RockShox technical manual, which is on the SRAM website as a PDF. Please print this out and read through it before you put the bike in the stand. Okay, enough preliminaries, let's get down to business. We recommend that you always wear eye protection and nitrile gloves when servicing a fork. First, we want to inspect the inside of both fork lower legs. We're looking to see if we've cleaned them out well so that there's no contamination or debris which could cause problems with other parts of the fork. Next, if the fork has foam lubricating rings, we'll want to make sure that those are well saturated with fork oil. This will lubricate the upper bushings of certain forks for that nice plush feel. Then, we'll check that the bottom-out bumpers are resting flat at the bottom of the lower legs. This will allow us to lubricate and reinstall the lower legs more easily. A long dowel or similar tool helps here. Finally, we can put a light application of grease on the inside of the dust wipers to make sliding the fork legs onto the upper tubes easier. Now that the lower legs are prepped, we can reinstall them onto the upper tubes. Make sure that the brake arch is situated to the front of the fork. Then install one side of the lower leg assembly onto its mating upper tube. Be careful not to fold the upper lip of the dust wiper as you do this. Once you get the first side of the lower leg assembly onto the first upper tube, carefully push the other side of the lower leg assembly onto the other upper tube. Again, be careful not to fold the upper lip of the dust seal. Once both legs are installed onto the upper tube assembly, slide the lower leg assembly about an inch further onto the upper tubes, but do not fully seat the lower legs just yet. Next, we'll install the lubricating fluid. Depending on which fork you're working on, there will be different requirements for fluid volume, so make sure you check out the tech manual for this step. Pour the appropriate amount of 15 weight oil into a graduated cylinder or other fluid measuring tool. Take the fork out of the stand and hold it upside down so that the steer tube is toward the ground at about a 45-degree angle. Carefully pour the appropriate amount of fluid into each leg. Once all of the fluid is in, slowly slide the lower legs all the way onto the upper tubes until you can see the damper shaft and the spring shaft through the lower leg bolt holes. Reinstall the fork into the stand so that the fork is horizontal or parallel to the floor. If you've pushed the lower legs onto the upper tubes far enough, you should be able to install the bolts and engage the shaft threads. If you're working on a dual air fork, the dual air shaft should be protruding from the bolt hole so that you can see all of the threads. A helpful hint is to check the threads that the bolt is going to engage and see if you got any fluid into the thread area. If you did, wipe that area with the corner of a rag so that the threads are dry. Install fresh crush washers and retainers onto the bolts, or just a crush washer onto the dual air nut if applicable. Then use a 5mm Allen key to thread the bolts into the bottom of the fork. Torque them both to 60 inch-pounds. If you have a dual air fork, use a 10mm socket or open end wrench to thread the nut onto the shaft. Torque that to 45 inch-pounds. Reinstall the rebound adjuster knob by snapping it onto the rebound side bolt. Okay, you're done. If you're working on an air fork, it's time to air it up. If you're working on a dual air fork, make sure you inflate the positive chamber first.